Brought to you by concordiatheology.org, bringing you resources that support the vigorous life of the mind in service of the gospel of Christ.
Welcome to Lectionary Kickstart. We're sparking your thoughts for Sunday as you plan your sermon and teaching lesson. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordolo, here with Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Nafsker. They're both professors of homiletics here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. You can hear all about us in our introductory episode, but trust me, they are pretty good preachers. All right, let's get started. David, where are we in the church year?
We are at the fifth Sunday in Lent, nearing the end of the Lenten season, a time when the church meditates on the Passion of Christ, and I think next Sunday will be Palm Sunday.
Yep.
And what are the texts for this week, Peter?
The texts are from Isaiah 43, Philippians 3, Luke 20, and Psalm 126.
As always, I ask each of you to tell me which text you would choose to preach about. To determine who goes first, the Philippians passage today talks about pressing on toward the goal for the prize. What is the farthest you've ever run in a game or a race?
I did a mile swim.
That's really great.
I know.
That's great.
I did a mile swim. It was in Boy Scouts, right? And it was for the swimming medal or whatever, badge.
Is that why you always are carrying around that sash with the badge of your swimming?
I am, yes.
Look at what steel and iron that has imparted to your personality. Good job. What about you, Peter?
Well, I can't top that. I probably ran some races as a kid, but I don't remember. I hate running, so.
Isn't there running in basketball?
But you don't keep track of how long. I run up and down the court all day, but actually just running for running's sake, to me, there's little less miserable than that.
Well, I haven't run very far. The farthest I've done is 5K. David, you win. You get to go
good.
first.
Thank you.
Before Peter, the non-runner.
So sometimes, you come across a text that's hard, and so you go to another one. Mm-hmm. And then sometimes
you have four to pick from.
I know. Sometimes you come across a text that's hard, and you're like, I think I'm going to lean into that. I'm going to.
Which we should do more often, probably. Because the fact that it's hard suggests there's something that we need to face that is not natural.
Yes,
Right.
It's hard for us in the pew, too. We want to know what it means.
Right.
That's great.
So I'm going with the gospel reading. The parable is just so tragic and so dark. That's the one I'm going to go with. And I think the overall activity that I'm doing is when I would visit people in the hospital and they would have just received bad news about cancer or whatever the diagnosis was, there was this prayer I used to say where I would ask God to help us see beyond the hardness of his hand to the softness of his heart. And in this parable, I think we see the hardness of God's hand. We see difficulties in the way things are transpiring. But I think if we meditate on it and we look for it, we can see the softness of God's heart. And so I'd like to look at three ways in which God reveals the softness of his heart in this very difficult parable. And so, Jessica, if you could read verse 10 through 12.
When the time came, he sent a servant to the tenants, so that they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent another servant, but they also beat and treated him shamefully and sent him away empty-handed. And he sent yet a third. This one also they wounded and cast out.
It's interesting that the same thing keeps happening. I mean, at the end of the parable, the owner of the vineyard basically says, I'm going to kick out all these people, kill them, and give the vineyard to someone else. So he could have done that. He could have pulled the trigger at any time. But you have 3 times when he sends a servant, and 3 times the servants are treated shamefully, that God's people have been rebellious, and God is patient with them. I mean, I think that's the softness of God's heart, is the patience of God that we see, that God's people were rebellious in the desert, in the wilderness, brings them to the promised land. They're rebellious there. You've got the judges that are raised up, and they keep falling to sin. Then they rebel and ask for a king. He gives them a king, and then they rebel. I mean, it's again and again and again, and this is a pattern of rebellion, and yet God, through all of it, is patient because he desires not to condemn the wicked, but to save them. And so one of the qualities of God, one of the soft pieces of his heart is the patience that God has here. And it kind of makes me think about either personally, times when I recognize that God has been patient with me, or it calls me to think about times when, unlike God, I'm not patient with others, right? And so there's a softness of God's heart in his patience. And it's near the end of the ministry of Jesus. He's in Jerusalem. And, actually the parable itself is an example of the patience of God, that Jesus is telling this parable in order to turn the Pharisees and chief priests around, that they would repent. And he still desires, at the very end, he still desires that they be brought to the faith, even on the cross. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And so we see the patient desire of God for salvation for all people. Then second, Jessica, if you could read verse 13.
Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my beloved son. Perhaps they will respect him."
We see the patience of God in this parable, but I think we also see the pain of God, that God is patient to the point of painfulness, to the point of losing his only son for the sake of calling people back into his kingdom. And so we see kind of the patience of God, and we see the pain of God. We have a God who opens himself up to suffering at our hands because he is so desirous of bringing us into his kingdom. And then the last piece would be the promise of God, and that comes in the quotation that Jesus makes when he talks to the people at the end. Jessica, if you could read verse 17.
But he looked directly at them and said, "What then is this that is written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone."
Okay, and so there is a promise of God here that the rejection of his son is going to be the cornerstone of a new building. And so, we have it open with this guy planting a vineyard. This God is not just going to plant a vineyard, he's actually going to build a city. And that city is going to be built on the resurrection of the son that was killed. And so there's a promise of God that our future is filled with a community that is built on the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and no one will be able to take that down. And so we've got three qualities of God that you see in the parable: the patience of God, the pain of God, and the promise of God. Now, with this parable, I think one of the things that is always difficult is, where do we find ourselves in the parable? I firmly believe that left to ourselves by our human nature, we would kill Jesus when he comes to us. But I'm wondering if that's really the place where we belong. I mean, I think that in the parable, God is putting us in the place of the others to whom he has given the vineyard. That's who we are. I think it might be helpful for us to imagine ourselves either as the people who are given the vineyard, or to imagine ourselves as the servants who are being sent out to others to bring them in.
Who may well be mistreated shamefully,
right.
Sent away empty-handed.
Right. Yeah. And yet our mission is the patience of God that suffers pain in order to make his promises known.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, because it is tempting to put ourselves in places in these parables where we don't really belong, and I think that's a great example of this one. We really aren't the people of God, the baptized people of God who have gathered because they believe in Jesus, are not the ones who are killing the servants and killing the son. And so I think helping them read that parable rightly and see themselves in the right place is really pretty important.
Right, yeah. I mean, and granted, if you don't know the history of a place, you can sometimes repeat it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But we know the history, and we know what lies behind, and at what great cost this kingdom has now been given to us as God's people.
Great, David. Thank you. Peter, what about you?
I was looking at the text this week, and I thought the psalm kind of captured my imagination. And so I'm going to suggest a sermon on Psalm 126. Let me say a thing about this psalm. You notice when you look at the whole thing that it kind of speaks from a couple different perspectives. The first 3 verses are about the past, and then the last verses are directed toward the future. And so as I was thinking about this psalm, I was thinking about the feelings of nostalgia. You guys experience nostalgia sometime, right? The word actually means homecoming pain, where you are kind of longing to be home, and because of that longing, you feel pain. And so you think about the various things that make you feel nostalgic.
Baby pictures of my kids.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Whenever I see them, like, you're happy to see the picture, but it hurts.
Yeah. And what about you? What makes you, Dave, nostalgic?
Food. Certain foods make me nostalgic. I think of meals I have had with people with that food. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I grew up here in St. Louis, so sometimes, I find myself in a part of the city that I've not been in since I was a kid. And, that kind of thing just brings back these feelings of nostalgia. I think there's nostalgia in this text, especially the first part of it. And so I'm thinking about a sermon that would kind of basically be an expository verse-by-verse structure, where you kind of just walk through the psalm and let the development of the psalm itself organize the sermon.
But we know it's going to be kind of looking at the past and then looking at the future. Is
right.
that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So just kind of let the psalm do that. So the nice thing is it's a short psalm. Sometimes psalms are really long and you can't treat the whole thing. Mm-hmm. But this one, it's one of the psalms of ascent. It's one the people of God going up to Jerusalem probably would have known by heart, maybe a call and response. And so this kind of psalm has played a significant part in the lives of God's people for a while. You might even invite a children's message to memorize the psalm or something like that. I don't know. So let's start with, Jessica, would you read verses 1 through 3?
When the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion, we were like those who dream. Then our mouth was filled with laughter and our tongue with shouts of joy. Then they said among the nations, the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. We are glad.
So think about these 3 verses. The people of God are looking back on when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion. And what does it describe? What was it like back then? Oh, we were like those who dream. We were filled with laughter, shouts of joy. We just couldn't stop talking about the wonderful things of God and the wonderful things that He's done for us. It's this recollection of joy. Now, when I read that and thought about it for a little bit, I was reminded of a part of a book called The Book of God by Walt Wangerin Jr. The subtitle is The Bible as a Novel. And so it tells the story of the Scriptures, not kind of according to the way the books of the Bible are laid out, but as one big story. And it's filled with all sorts of creative license. So if you like that kind of thing, then you'll have a blast. If you don't, then just realize it's a novel. But one of the things that just captured my imagination when I read through this a couple of years ago was the way it described the people of Israel after going through the Red Sea. Okay, so he begins one of his chapters talking about how, they hurried through the night and they were just still racing after they got through the Red Sea, and it was very serious and very somber. And then it says this, but sunlight and the warmth of the morning seemed to change things. Here and there the children heard soft talking, a little whispering, then giggling. The young women were giggling. Suddenly a man let out a bark of laughter and immediately shut up. But then another man started to laugh, and he could not stop. He covered his mouth, but the laughter came out of his nose. His shoulders were shaking. The people who saw him began to grin. Then they chuckled too. Then they broke into outright laughter. They roared with laughter. They laughed till the tears ran down their cheeks. They covered their stomachs and gasped for air and howled as if they were hurting. I love that description of the experience of deliverance that fills with joy and that you're almost afraid to start to laugh because it's serious too. But that description of remembering the deliverance of God with joy and laughter. Now, the psalm is talking about when the Lord restored the fortunes of Zion. And it's not quite exactly clear what that refers to. It might be the return from Babylon. And so it may not fit perfectly that reading from the Wangeren book. But the idea that remembering what God has done for us inspires joy and laughter and gratitude that bursts forth that you can't control. That to me is sometimes we remember God's acts of salvation and deliverance maybe a little too somberly. That this is incredible. What God has done. It's incredible what He has done for us. And that's what this feelings of nostalgia, those who are reciting this psalm, they're remembering the laughter and the joy. But they have to remember it because they're not in it right now. Mm-hmm. And so this psalm, in a way, is a psalm that is sung in a present crisis. And so to get there, we go to verse 4. Would you read verse 4, Jessica?
Restore our fortunes, O Lord, like streams in the Negeb. All
right, that's just one verse. It's a prayer, restore our fortunes. And of course, you only pray that when you haven't been restored. And so, you can think about this psalm as these people and as your people are thinking back to the past deliverance of God, the past blessings. They're led in the present to pray because things aren't the way they should be. And of course, you guys know, and I know, and all of your hearers know, that there are things in our lives, in our churches, in our situation here that is kind of at crisis level. On a personal situation, we all have personal struggles that are not good, that we're not laughing about. As congregations, we have struggles as a church in society, and so we pray, Lord, restore our fortunes, like streams in the Negeb, like the water that brings life to the desert. And so maybe in this point I would maybe use the desert, in the Negeb desert as the idea here. The present situation can feel a little bit like a wasteland, a desert where there's no hope and there's no reason to rejoice. And so the psalm moves from remembering nostalgia to prayer in the present, but then it moves again, verses 5 and 6. Would you read those?
Those who sow in tears will reap with shouts of joy. He who goes out weeping, bearing the seed for sowing, shall come home with shouts of joy, bringing his sheaves with him.
So notice what the psalmist does. The psalmist then moves from the present prayer to a confession and a proclamation of what will be. And so what God has done, you could maybe say in part or in a shadow or a type or of something in the past that led us to rejoice. In the future, He will restore us. He will, there'll be shouts of joy, and those who were weeping will shout with joy, bringing his sheaves home with him. And so even in the midst of our current crisis, where we beg God for deliverance and restoration, we remind each other and we proclaim to each other this promise that things will be restored. There will be joy again.
I like the future portion is talking about seasons, basically, right? So there's a season of sowing and then there's a season of harvesting. And so it's not necessarily expecting an immediate transformation. It's recognizing that, this is a season and we're going out sowing, but we're sowing in hope of what's going to come. And so it's kind of, it intervenes and prevents people of thinking that there's going to be an immediate change, that sometimes these things take time.
Yeah, that use of the agricultural metaphor, everybody knows that it just takes some time.
Right.
But it sure is hard if you don't have that long view. It sure looks like there's nothing going on.
Right, yeah.
It's going to take forever.
I was in a Bible study where they were talking about the agricultural perspective, and I'm like, why would they be crying when they're taking their seeds out? And the leader said that sometimes if you were starving, you could eat the seeds. But if you went and planted them, you're risking everything because you'll have more if they grow. But if they don't, you've just buried your food. I thought that was interesting.
And so I would look at this this psalm and a sermon on the psalm as a chance to acknowledge that things are rough right now, kind of the desert, the wasteland, but God has been good to us, and he has led us to joy in the past, and he will ultimately do the same again. In a way, you're kind of living in the in-between time now. As the book by Tom Long puts it, From Memory to Hope. Mm-hmm. Kind of You live in this place where we hope for the future, we remember the past, and that both the past and the future, the promise, what God did in the past and his promise of the future is what allows us to endure the wasteland in which we live right now.
So if your sermon is focusing on this psalm, Peter, do you like to have the psalm before or after the sermon in your service?
I would probably have it before. Oftentimes there's a psalmody in our services, and that, depending on how exactly you put the liturgy together, that can be kind of before the collect or among the readings. And so I would have it somewhere in there probably, I think. Mm-hmm. But like I said, if I'm going to do a verse-by-verse structure for this sermon, we'd read the whole psalm throughout the course of the sermon. So whether you read it before or after, or maybe both, maybe you'd make this part of your prayers for the service later on in the service.
So would you have it printed in the bulletin, word for word, the whole thing?
Yeah, maybe. Or if you have pew Bibles, or if you have a screen.
I think it would be helpful to follow along while you're preaching that. Since you're doing the whole psalm, if you have us turn to it in the hymnal, or you have an insert in your bulletin so that we can see the whole thing as a whole, and that would be really helpful.
So let me ask you this, because we just had this discussion in my hom class this morning. We were talking about one of the students gave a devotion, and he was using his Bible, and he was in the Bible a lot. And he kept referring to it and looking back and reading verses. And he said when he looked up, we debriefed it after he gave his devotion. And he said oftentimes he looked up, and the people that he was trying to make eye contact with had their heads in the Bible. And so we had a little bit of a discussion about, is it good to have people looking at their Bibles, reading the verses while you're preaching, or is that disruptive of the connection you have? What do you say about that, Jessica? Do you appreciate having the Bible open and being able to dig into it, or does that almost separate you a little bit from the preacher?
I'm more of a visual learner, so I would like to have the text in front of me, but honestly not the whole Bible, because I think that would be distracting, even though it's important to put it in the context. But just to have that one little bit for me to focus on and follow along, I can see where that would be helpful. But I also think it's helpful during Bible reading sometimes to ask your congregation not to follow along and say, I just want you to listen to this. Just even close your eyes and just listen to this Old Testament story and imagine it while I'm saying it. I think that can be helpful too. So if you're preaching on it and it's short, print it in the bulletin, for me anyway. But okay. I think there's an important place for just listening to God's word and not following along. Great, thanks, Peter. That's all for today. We're in the end of Lent. You might be exhausted getting ready for Easter and not have had the time for your own Lenten meditations. In order to support your Lenten devotions, we've produced a video series called Honest Repentance. It offers devotional sermons for each week of Lent. This sermon series is free. They were written and preached by Dr. David Maxwell, Professor of Systematic Theology here at Concordia Seminary, St. Louis. He is a pretty good preacher. You can find this free resource and other episodes of Lectionary Kickstart on our website, concordiatheology.org. If you'd like to see this show continue, subscribe for free, share, leave a review. I'm your host and producer, Jessica Bordolo. Join us next week here at Lectionary Kickstart when Dr. David Schmidt and Dr. Peter Napsker will spark your thoughts for next Sunday.
And I had put up a tent, and I didn't bring any equipment to put the tent up, so I used a rock, and I had ripped off the nail off my thumb.
Wow.
You want to talk about the stupidest looking person that existed was me on that mile-long swim.